Growing up, I'd often heard rumors about the cemetery's groundskeeper, Mr. Jake Ward. A man of few words and a face weathered like cracked leather. He seemed to carry the weight of centuries on his stooped shoulders. "Stay clear of Stonemire at night," he'd warn, his gravelly voice heavy with conviction. "The shadows there have teeth." Like most of the town's children, I dismissed him as a lonely eccentric. But deep down, I was curious. When I was 16, I got my chance to see the cemetery for myself. My best friend, Nancy, and I were exploring Elk Grove one evening when we stumbled across a forgotten path leading to the cemetery gates. The wrought iron fence loomed like a black skeleton against the twilight sky. "Think Jake's stories are true?" Nancy asked, her voice quivering with excitement. I smirked, more to mask my own unease than anything else. Only one way to find out. We climbed through a gap in the fence, and the air grew colder with every step. The cemetery was a labyrinth of moss-covered stones and leaning statues, but one grave stood out. A massive crypt with the name Cursed Beast carved into its marble facade. The door was ajar, revealing a staircase spiraling into darkness. Nancy hesitated at the threshold. "Frederick, maybe we shouldn't." "Come on," I urged, masking my own fear. "It's just a crypt. What's the worst that could happen?" As we descended, the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. At the bottom of the stairs, we found a cavernous chamber filled with strange carvings and ancient urns. But it was the center of the room that held our attention. A massive stone pedestal bearing a grotesque idol. It depicted a monstrous creature, vaguely humanoid, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to follow us. "Do you feel that?" Nancy whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded. The room seemed alive, pulsing with a cold, unnatural energy. Before we could investigate further, we heard footsteps echoing above. Panicking, we fled the crypt and ran straight into Jake Ward. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, his face pale with something between anger and fear. "Cursed Beast's legacy isn't for the living to meddle with." We tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. "Leave now," he barked, his eyes darting nervously to the crypt. "And never come back." Nancy and I kept our promise for years, but the pull of the crypt lingered in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. After graduating from college, I returned to Tilsard to care for my ailing mother. It was then that I noticed strange occurrences. Whispers in the woods, flickering lights near the cemetery, and dreams of hollow eyes watching me. I decided to confront Jake, now retired and living on the outskirts of town. His home was cluttered with books on folklore and arcane symbols, and he seemed both relieved and terrified to see me. "You stirred something that cannot be undone," he said gravely. Cursed Beast was no ordinary man. He was a sorcerer who sought to cheat death, and his spirit lingers, hungry for the living. "But why me?" I asked, the fear in my voice undeniable. "Because you entered his domain," Jake replied, "and now he's marked you." Jake reluctantly agreed to help me. Together, we returned to the cemetery, armed with nothing but lanterns and his cryptic knowledge. Nancy, now a journalist, insisted on joining us despite my protests. "You're not doing this alone," she said firmly. "Besides, I need the story." The crypt was just as we'd left it, though the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. Jake examined the idol with a mix of fascination and dread. "This is the anchor," he murmured. "Destroy it, and beast's hold on this world will weaken." Before we could act, and now, guttural growl filled the chamber. From the shadows emerged a figure, the Cursed Beast, a creature of nightmare proportions. Its elongated limbs twisted unnaturally, and its hollow eyes burned with an otherworldly light. "Stay back," Jake shouted, his voice breaking for the first time. The Cursed Beast moved with terrifying grace, its limbs skittering across the walls like a spider. It spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Nancy screamed as the creature launched, but Jake threw a vial of some pungent liquid that erupted into flames, forcing it back. "Destroy the idol," he cried. I hesitated, my hands trembling as I approached the pedestal. The creature's hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw visions of despair and decay. But Nancy's voice broke through the haze. "Frederick, now!" With all my strength, I smashed the idol. The chamber shook violently, and the cursed beast let out a bone-chilling wail before dissolving into ash. The cemetery was silent as we emerged, the first rays of dawn breaking through the mist. Jake stayed behind, insisting on performing some kind of ritual to seal the crypt. Nancy and I never spoke of that night again, though we both bore scars. Hers on her arm, mine on my soul. Tilsard eventually returned to its quiet existence, but I know better than to believe the cursed beast is truly gone. Sometimes when the wind howls through Elk Grove, I hear whispers that chill me to the bone. Curiosity may open doors, but some should remain forever closed. After that night, things in Tilsard seemed to return to normal, or at least as normal as they could be in a town like ours. The town square was bustling with everyday life. The baker's shop filled with the scent of fresh bread, the post office with its weathered signs swaying in the breeze. People went about their business, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded just beyond the cemetery gates. But for me, nothing was ever the same. Every night, as I lay in bed, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. They crept across the walls, merging into the corners of my room. I would lie awake, heart pounding, waiting for them to retreat. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cursed beast hadn't truly been destroyed, that somehow we'd only delayed its return. Nancy felt it too. She had taken up residence in a small apartment above the old bookstore, her mind fixated on the story. She couldn't let it go. "There's more to this, Frederick," she told me one night, her voice trembling with the same unease I felt. "We didn't just destroy an idol. We broken something ancient." I didn't want to believe her, but deep down, I knew she was right. It wasn't long before strange things began happening again. The whispers in the woods grew louder, more insistent, calling my name. The lights would flicker at odd hours, and the temperature would drop, as if the town itself were holding its breath. The locals began reporting strange occurrences too. A figure lurking at the edge of Elk Grove. Lights seen moving between the trees late at night. Shadows that seemed too solid to be mere tricks of the light. The worst was when I began seeing things in my peripheral vision. Distorted shapes darting out of sight as soon as I turned my head. I couldn't be sure whether they were real or just my mind playing tricks on me. But the feeling that something was out there, watching me, never left. A week later, I received a call from Jake Ward. His voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Frederick, we made a mistake." "What are you talking about?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "I thought we sealed it." "I saw it. But the idol, it was just the surface. Cursed beast is power. It's not bound to that stone. It's in the land itself, in the very fabric of Tilsard." "Then what the hell are we supposed to do about it?" I shouted, my frustration rising. "You said it would end." I don't know," Jake admitted. "But I see it coming. Something's waking up, Frederick. Something far worse than we've faced." He hung up abruptly, leaving me in a stunned silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of whatever evil beast had summoned. The following evening, Nancy and I decided to visit Jake, hoping he'd come up with some sort of solution. The town was quiet as we drove out of Tilsard, the sun setting behind the mountains. The shadows in the trees seemed to deepen with each passing mile, and a strange unease settled over the car. It was like we were being drawn into something, some invisible force tugging at us. When we arrived at Jake's house, the door was ajar. The familiar smell of old books and incense hung in the air, but something was wrong. The house was too still, as if it were holding its breath. We called out for him, but there was no answer. Nancy's voice trembled as she whispered, "Frederick, look." On the floor, next to the fireplace, was a large, blood-red symbol carved into the wood. The same symbol I had seen on the idol. A chill ran down my spine as I knelt to examine it. This wasn't a ritual to keep something out. It was a calling, a summoning. Suddenly, there was a sound from upstairs, a faint scratching noise. like claws dragging across the floor. Nancy froze, her eyes wide. What the hell was that? I don't know, I said, my voice tight with fear. But we need to find Jake. We made our way up the stairs cautiously, the wood creaking under our feet. As we reached the top, the air grew colder, a biting chill that made my breath visible in the dim light. I pushed open the door to Jake's study, and there he was sitting in his chair, staring blankly ahead. "Jake!" I called, stepping closer. His head turned slowly, his eyes hollow and glazed, as if he weren't truly seeing us. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat, deep and inhuman. His lips curled into a twisted grin, revealing sharp, elongated teeth. It wasn't Jake anymore. It was something else, something that had taken him. I backed away, heart racing. "Nancy, get out of here!" But it was too late. The air around us seemed to shimmer, and from the shadows, figures began to emerge. The cursed beast form flickered in and out of existence, its long limbs stretching unnaturally. Behind it, a dozen more figures followed, each one more grotesque than the last. They were all of them hollow, shadows of what they once were, their bodies twisted and torn by the curse of Cursed Beast. Nancy screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the cacophony of whispers that filled the room. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, their voices like rustling leaves in a storm. "You cannot escape," the Cursed Beast's voice echoed, coming from Jake's mouth. "You have awakened us, and now you will serve." I grabbed Nancy's arm and dragged her out of the room, but as we reached the staircase, one of the creatures lunged at us, its limbs like tendrils wrapping around my legs. I shouted in pain as the cold touch of its fingers burned through my jeans, freezing my skin. "Rot!" I cried, pushing Nancy ahead of me. We barreled down the stairs, but the creatures were faster. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, but their speed was terrifying. We ran through the house, each hallway feeling longer than the last, as if the walls themselves were shifting, closing in on us. Finally, we reached the front door, but it wouldn't open. The air outside had turned heavy, the very sky above us seeming to pulse with a dark energy. The Cursed Beast's voice echoed behind us. "It is too late. You cannot outrun what is already inside you." The door slammed shut with a deafening thud, trapping us inside. We had no choice but to face them. We couldn't outrun the curse. It was already in the land, in the air, in our blood. What are we going to do? Nancy whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to stop it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to finish what we started." I turned to Jake, or what was left of him. The Cursed Beast, still wearing his skin, was the vessel through which beast power flowed. I knew now that the key to ending this was to sever that connection. "We need to destroy the source," I said, determination replacing my fear. "The land, the curse itself." Nancy nodded, her hands trembling but resolute. "Then let's end this." We didn't know how, but we knew we had to try. Together, we prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The curse of Cursed Beast had awakened, but it wasn't going to consume us without a fight. The house seemed to close in on us, the walls creeping inward like the sickening embrace of something ancient, suffocating. Every shadow felt alive, every corner held a secret, and I could hear the sound of scratching again, this time coming from behind the walls. The creatures were everywhere, lurking just out of sight. Their whispering voices filled the air, a chorus of despair. We had no plan, no clear path forward, but there was no turning back now. The curse was alive, feeding off the very essence of Tilsard. Cursed Beast power had seeped into the land, and as long as it remained, the Hollow Ones would walk among us. I turned to Nancy, my heart racing. "We need to find the source, the heart of this curse. We need to find where it all started." Her eyes were wide with fear, but beneath the terror, there was determination. She nodded, biting her lip. "I've been studying the old texts. I think I know where we can start." We left Jake's house, the air outside sharp and bitter. The town, once a place of quiet serenity, now felt like a ghost town, empty and hollow. The trees in Elk Grove loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. Nancy led me to the town's old cemetery, the place where the curse had first been unleashed. The gravestones were weathered and cracked, their names barely legible. A faint mist hung in the air, and the ground was soft, as if the earth itself was slowly eroding. There, at the center of the cemetery, stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching into the sky like the hands of some forgotten deity. "This is it," Nancy whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. Cursbeast's grave was here. His power, it's tied to this place. I looked around, feeling the weight of the air press against my chest. There was something about the tree, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just the place, it was the curse itself, still lingering like a poison. Nancy knelt in front of the tree, pulling out a small journal. She flipped through its pages quickly, scanning the old, brittle pages. It says here that Beast's power is bound to his final resting place. But to truly destroy it, we need to sever the connection between him and the land. And there's one way to do that. "Tell me," I urged, gripping her shoulder tightly. The weight of the situation was pressing down on me, and I knew time was running out. Nancy hesitated, her eyes dark with uncertainty. "There's an artifact, a relic, that was said to have been buried with him. It's called the Heartstone. If we can find it, we can destroy the curse. But it won't be easy. Beast's power is still very much alive, and the closer we get to the Heartstone, the more dangerous it will become." I nodded grimly. "Then let's find it." We ventured deeper into the cemetery, the air growing colder with every step. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, as though something were shifting beneath us. The hollow whispers, faint at first, began to grow louder, more insistent, as though the land itself were speaking to us. Nancy stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she focused on something ahead. I followed her gaze and saw a faint glow coming from beneath a cluster of gravestones. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a pulse of pale light like the heartbeat of the earth. "Over there," Nancy said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's where the Heartstone should be." We approached cautiously, the ground soft underfoot as we neared the glow. As we got closer, I could feel an unsettling pressure in the air, like the atmosphere itself was thick with dread. My breath came in short gasps, and my skin prickled with the weight of an unseen presence. Nancy knelt by one of the gravestones, brushing away the moss and dirt. Her fingers touched something cold and metallic. "This is it," she whispered. A hidden compartment in the stone had opened, revealing a small, ornate chest. It was old, older than anything I had ever seen, and covered in strange symbols. The chest was locked, but the moment Nancy's fingers touched it, the lock clicked open with an unnatural sound, as if it had been waiting for a touch. Inside the chest, wrapped in tattered cloth, lay the Heartstone. It was a smooth, dark crystal, its surface glimmering with an ethereal light that seemed to pulse with an inner energy. I reached for it, but the moment my fingers brushed against its surface, the ground beneath us trembled. The cursed beast's voice echoed through the cemetery, now louder and clearer than ever. "You cannot destroy what is already within you." The sky above darkened as shadows converged around us. Figures materialized from the fog, their twisted forms moving with a terrifying speed. The hollow ones, dozens of them, emerged from the earth itself, their hollow eyes locked onto us. Nancy grabbed the Heartstone, clutching it tightly. "We have to do this now." I pulled her toward me as the creatures closed in, their movements jerky and unnatural. I could feel their presence, like cold fingers brushing against my skin, and their whispers filled my mind, urging me to give in, to join them. "No," I muttered, forcing the thoughts out of my head. "We won't give up." We ran, the hollow ones chasing us, their twisted laughter echoing in the distance. The cemetery seemed to stretch endlessly before us, The gate's nowhere in sight. I could feel the pressure building, the weight of the curse pressing down on us. Nancy stumbled, her hand still clutching the Heartstone. "It's not enough," she gasped, her breath ragged. "The Heartstone, it's only a part of it. We need to destroy the tree." "The tree?" I asked, confused. "But we can't. We have to," she said, determination filling her voice. "The Heartstone is the key, but the tree is where the curse originates. We destroy the tree, and the curse dies with it." I didn't question her. If there was any chance of ending this nightmare, we had to take it. We reached the base of the ancient oak tree, its twisted roots rising like veins from the ground. The hollow ones were closing in on us, their forms blotting out the dim light. The air crackled with energy, and the earth beneath our feet trembled with the power of the curse. I looked at Nancy. "How do we destroy?" She held the Heartstone up, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The light from the crystal grew brighter, illuminating the cemetery in a ghostly glow. "We have to place it at the tree's roots," she said. "The Heartstone will sever the bond between beast and the land." I didn't hesitate. We ran toward the tree, the hollow ones hot on our heels. Just as we reached the base, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the cursed beast, its form more monstrous than I had ever seen, its body contorted and unnatural. It reached out with long, skeletal arms, its eyes burning with malevolent fire. "You cannot undo what has already been done," it hissed. "Beast's power is eternal." But Nancy was resolute. She thrust the Heartstone into the earth at the base of a tree, and the moment it touched the ground, a violent tremor shook the cemetery. The sky split open with a thunderous roar, and the hollow ones screamed in fury. The tree's roots writhed, as if they were alive, and the very air seemed to shimmer with dark energy. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the tree burst into flame, its ancient bark turning to ash. The hollow ones vanished in a whirlwind of smoke, and the curse that had plagued Tilsard for so long began to unravel. It was over.